Okay, we're here today with Victor Mallad. Victor has been with psychohistory for quite a time and was and is a very active reviewer of books and writer of articles. Victor, what were you doing at Psychohistory Convention today?
Today I gave a presentation entitled Denial of Death, America in Decline. I was essentially speaking about the defense systems that Americans use to ward off death and annihilation anxieties and how those defense systems are breaking down and facilitating the decline of the nation. The themes that we're looking at now, there are several macro historical processes that have triggered nations' regression to fetal and childhood traumas, such as the fall of the Soviet Union and 9/11 terrorist attacks. And today I discussed how those events affected the American psyche, the shared psyche. They brought about the destabilization of the U.S. group's defense systems against death and annihilation anxieties. I think people deny death as a survival mechanism. It is unavoidable, essentially, as psychological and biological beings. To survive, we deny death at an individual and collective level. So today I spoke about shared denials of death.
When you see Sarah Palin shooting a moose from a helicopter, is that a denial of death, or is it something more profound?
Yeah, well, Sarah Palin's attitude towards animals, her shooting of animals, killing of animals, yes, it's another mode of warding off her own death and annihilation anxieties. We use animals and people to rid ourselves of our own psychological death. So, yes, Sarah Palin's behavior pattern of shooting defenseless dogs or defenseless wolves from helicopters, of course, is part of her defense system against her own death, her own psychic feelings of badness.
How about Americans in general? What are they doing? The Tea Party, for example, have a different view of denying death than ordinary Americans.
Mm-hmm. The way people deny death, I think it is not reducible to any one particular mode. We have religious, political modes of denying death or immortality ideologies. And the Tea Party system, of course, has its own mode of warding off impurities, death, and annihilation anxieties. Appeal, I think, for the Tea Partiers to the frontier days, or when they speak of the founding fathers, again, from a psychohistorical standpoint, founding fathers are placental substitutes. We purify ourselves through the founding fathers, through good gods. And so certainly this all relates to the fetal imprinting and childhood traumas. And it is understandable how in this period of rapid change and collective traumas that they would regress. We have regressive groups that are projecting at an unconscious level their fetal and childhood traumas.
Would the hatred of what is called Obamacare, health reform, have any relationship to denial of death?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the Obamacare or any other policy dealing with health has everything to do with our attitudes towards mortality. It is another bulwark against mortality. We want to extend our life. That's another form of our immortality system. So our attitudes towards his effort to bring this policy about, I think, says a lot about us. So certainly, Obamacare is, I could see where the polarized U.S. group would certainly have different views on it. Some would see it as undermining their immortality system. Others would see it as fortifying their immortality system.
Assuming for a minute we could even know who candidates will be next year, but we have a clue. We know the Democrats will have Obama. Mm-hmm. We suspect, we don't know, but we suspect that Mitt Romney may wind up being the Republican candidate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do they in any way impact the group's denial of death? How do they play with this?
Mm-hmm. In regards to Mitt Romney or Barack Obama, again, when we view it from a psychohistorical standpoint, groups delegate leaders to ward off death and annihilation anxieties. They're the postnatal placenta. They're the good father that protects us. So in this period of rapid change and uncertainty, it is certainly understandable if Mitt Romney wins, because he's a Mormon, he's a family man, he's an icon of the old guard, if you will, a religious man. So if this appeals to Americans, certainly he may be voted into office. Obama is a more complex character. He's a representation of multiculturalism, and if he's chosen, that certainly is also understandable in that the American society is very complex. It's multicultural, multiracial, so many people relate with him. So these are two very powerful political candidates. What the group feels in relation to Obama or Mitt Romney is very important, because we're acting emotionally. Very often it's not as much, we don't go through a high cognitive process, a high analytical process where we weigh all the evidence. We're acting emotionally. So to understand the direction we're going, to understand what leader we're going to want, Obama or Romney, we have to understand what the nation feels, its attitudes towards death, its anxieties, its fears. I first discovered psychohistory when I was on my own personal downward spiral. I came from an abusive home environment. I went through psychological torture and sexual abuse in the Soviet Union, and later suffered all sorts of problems. And part of my survival strategy was to write, and I wrote an article on institutionalized abuse of children in the Soviet Union, and I was searching to publish it somewhere, and just by luck, I found Lloyd DeMoss in Psychohistory. I contacted him. He asked me to send him the article. I sent it to him, and he said, hey, I'll publish it, and by the way, can you present this paper at our next convention? So I leaped at the opportunity, and it was in 1999, summer 1999, and from that point forward, I have been hooked to psychohistory. It has been just a tremendous experience for me at a personal level, but as a scholar in my professional work. What I found about psychohistory so appealing is that we're dealing with all aspects of the human being, not just at the conscious cognitive level, but at the unconscious, at the neuropsychological level. We're addressing the real human beings. It is very complex school of thought that addresses all aspects of human behavior that other schools neglect. When I take a look at other psychology schools, they're not looking at childhood trauma, they're not looking at fetal trauma, they're not looking at neuropsychological issues. And this is what we look at in psychohistory, in understanding group motivations, historical motivations. Other schools of thought I found simply lacking in scientific evidence and actual information about real human beings. They're more abstract, and they're dealing with more cognitive aspects of human beings and not the neuropsychological and unconscious. Psychohistory can help the average person, quote unquote, on the street who's not a behavioral scientist, who's not a scholar, to make sense of not only their situation, but the human condition, their historical moment, which is really exciting, to understand not only their trauma, but the shared trauma, that other human beings go through trauma, and how this shapes national identity, how this shapes national policy, how this shapes how we choose our leaders. So it can help an individual literally at all levels making sense of their daily life, what happens on their street, in their immediate economy, in their immediate community, in their immediate neighborhood. This is a school of thought that can shed light on literally all aspects of this very rapidly changing historical moment.